A conversation with Madison Police Chief Mike Koval this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. Keeping the peace, a simple concept that is at times incredibly complicated. We will learn about ourselves as a community over the next several weeks as we respond to reports of the investigation of the officer-involved shooting of Tony Robinson. I welcome to For the Record Madison Police Chief Mike Koval. Chief, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Neil.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Maybe you can just start by just telling us what you've been thinking about, what you've been doing strategically, tactically, as the report has gone to the DA's office. It'll be a couple of weeks yet. Talk about how you've been handling this, how you've been preparing for this.
Well, we know that given the volatility underlying this entire incident is that emotions are running high, feelings are fairly strong one way or another, depending how people look at the issues. And so, of course, I would be remiss if, as the chief of police, I wasn't looking at the long-term implications of the day after whatever charge or not to charge decision comes forward. So with that in mind, it's almost as if we had to use the sort of strategic planning we would with Halloween or Mifflin Street or Rhythm and Booms. We have to prepare for each and every contingency and then pray for the best. I'm hoping, obviously, that through overtures made to community leaders, some have titles, others just lead by action, and they have their retinue of followers. I'm hoping they can also concur with the thought that dissent, robust though it may be, is entirely appropriate as part of civic engagement, but I'm hoping we can also agree that keeping the community safe, intact, without violating other people's rights or their property is also integral to the whole discussion.
Of course, all of the events that you mentioned happen on a set date.
Yeah.
We don't know here quite how this is going to roll out. And for people who don't know, the fact that this report has now gone to the DA's office, District Attorney Ozan can take as much time as he needs
to deliberate on it. And of course, I know he'll take all that time and then some, which is necessary. And if he finds that there are elements of that report that are still wanting, he can redirect DCI to do additional follow-up. So I know that he's very capable, he's very competent, and he's very committed to doing the right thing and applying the law to the facts. And so I'm hoping that when he is close to giving that judgment, if you will, I hope that we get some lead time in order for me to be strategic in terms of staffing considerations.
His decision will be whether or not there is sufficient evidence to charge Officer Kenny with a crime.
Right.
Yes or no. And then, regardless of that decision, Chief, you then have additional responsibility here.
Yes, because there are things that are not squarely going to be addressed in terms of criminal culpability, which may have impacted or been violated in terms of the department's policies and procedures. So that's on an independent pathway.
All right, as we think through all of this, help us interpret some of the recent events, in particular a city council meeting that I was going to say was volatile, but was kind of odd.
It was.
Because there was some volatile testimony,
right,
but no response from the council. That caught your eye.
Well, it did, only because, quite frankly, for me, I think I had reached a tipping point. And that was sort of the final sort of straw for me because, again, from my perspective, and I'll be the first to admit, I'm very protective and defensive of my workforce. It's our city police department, so I hope all the constituents understand that there are 455 very conscientious, tried and true public servants who are doing their very best under some very difficult circumstances. So in that sense, because of the legalities of what that public hearing entailed, meaning there was no opportunity for rebuttal or clarification or redirect from me, that sort of became the summit where I thought I had to speak out on behalf of our department in the sense of, we don't expect an attaboy or an attagirl for the work that we're expected to do, but under these unique circumstances, we do need to hear some measure of validation and affirmation. And some of the comments were so unilaterally inclined to be conclusions of hyperbole that I could not let that very well go unchecked.
Do you have any sense that they heard you?
I think so. I think maybe because the silence towards me coming back has been, there's been some anger, there's been some resentment.
From council members?
Yep. Some very much feel that I overstepped my boundary and I didn't have an appreciation for what the bigger picture was. And quite frankly, I respectfully disagree with that, because I think there was a legal mechanism by calling by rule a committee of the whole, which could have been convened after that, in which some of these suppositions and diatribes could have at least been to some extent offset by my comments or that of all other alders. So I do think that there were other mechanisms that could have been availed and were not.
It's so hard because the idea of a bigger picture, everybody thinks there's a bigger picture. Everybody has a different bigger picture.
That's true.
I mean, I think it's really important that we all have that big picture.
Absolutely.
But it's how do we mesh these various versions of it?
Yes, and I do believe that there is a utility to having our citizens have a mechanism for venting those or expressing those very real feelings. But again, to my way of looking at it, that was sort of a unilateral, one-sided ex parte proceeding in which the other side never had a chance to lend its voice.
There's been sort of an ebb and flow to this. I don't know if that is something that you would have expected. Right now, it seems like there's a little bit of a lull until a decision is made. Is that kind of what you're expecting?
I think that the entire community, and ourselves included as being part of that, are all sort of trying to go into autogenic breathing again, because we've all been through the volatility of a phenomenal roller coaster ride of emotions and the comments back and forth and issues and inferences and innuendos and personal opinions that sort of belie any sense of what the facts are. All of this sort of we have to sort of pause. Let's let the fact finding that took place by DCI find its way to the prosecuting authority. Let's then let the prosecuting authority apply the law to these unique set of facts. And then hopefully, as a postscript to this, there will also be an opportunity for some teachable moments whereby we can all learn more about the legalities, the tactical considerations, the use of force components. I think at the end of the day, there's much yet to be done.
Yeah. If it's all right with you, I don't know if there's any value of going through all of that right now. There'll be plenty of time to do that after the decision comes out. Let's wait and see what the facts are.
I agree.
When we come back, let's talk about the role of community leadership right after this.
Certainly.
My guest this morning is Madison Police Chief Mike Koval. As we talk, the Department of Criminal Investigation, Department of DCI Investigations report on the officer-involved shooting of Tony Robinson has been delivered to District Attorney Ishmael Ozan. He will now make a ruling, and we anticipate that ruling, and we anticipate the community response to that ruling. What's your sense of, for lack of a better word, community leadership and their role in this, and how they're viewing that role and preparing for what's next? And you yourself said there's titular leadership and then there's leadership by example. So I guess I'm using all of them as part of this conversation.
I think that what I sense is that from a plurality of looking and engaging with folks is that I do believe they understand they have a role to play in terms of whether it's talking to your constituents, your congregants, your students. It has so many levels, whether it be faith-based, school discussions, race circles, those prominent established organizations like NAACP, Urban League, 100 Black Men, Central Hispanic. There are so many different opportunities here. So the key is, can we use this pregnancy pause here to have those difficult discussions and to say, what will that look like as the postscript of the decision comes in?
Do you have any sense of whether these leaders are talking among themselves?
I do believe that there is that level of healthy engagement.
Because we've seen some of it up to this point.
Absolutely. And I think to their credit, everybody understands how difficult these will be, and that people want to find that balance where can we show support for keeping the community intact, but I also don't necessarily want to believe or assume or infer that if I'm counseling one measure, stand with the police and ask for a sense of calm, I don't want that to be disingenuous or disenfranchising for those of my folks who feel very heatedly about how the outcome should go. So there's some sensitivity in terms of how they're going to deliver that message and what that will look like.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to them? Can you tell them how you think it might?
Well, and luckily, we've had a number of conversations for many months now, and I think they understand the delicate balance that lies herein. And I do feel that at each and every one of these meetings, we come back with a better sense, a healthier sense of appreciation for one another's perspectives and an understanding how this will not be easy. And I think that they're amenable. Those that I have coalesced with, visited with, had a Diet Coke with, I think everybody believes that we want to do what's best for the community.
So you prepare for the worst and you hope for the best. Really, in this community, you know, what does the worst look like? We want robust civic conversation, right? And if it happens in the streets, it happens in the streets.
Absolutely.
It's hard to know where the line is. Property damage, injury. I mean, I think we can all agree with that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of a loud, angry voice,
well, I think we have to find what is that chord of what is reasonable under the totality of what's in front of us. Obviously, that motoring traffic is going to be inconvenienced because they're rerouted or because people take an intersection. That in and of itself does not rise to the crescendo of saying take immediate action. But if you're tying up an intersection forever and a day, now it goes beyond the pale of what's reasonable in order to make that point happen. So we're constantly looking at this on a case-by-case basis, and we're obviously going to be extremely deferential in picking only those spots where, frankly, people are at risk and their property.
Really, I want your perspective on this, Chief, because it's something that I run into all the time, and that's the idea that Black Lives Matter, just as a phrase, has a lot of deep meaning, but it's interpreted by many as, well, then you're saying cops' lives don't matter. And to my mind, it's not an either-or preposition. And that we have to get away from that, you'll forgive the phrase, black and white, you know, kind of interpretation of it. Can Madison Police, can the community say, Black Lives Matter, that means something. We have to understand what that means, and we have to take steps to ensure that we all agree on that, but at the same time, we can support.
And I like the way you crafted it, because I don't think, as you suggested, that we're finding ourselves in an all or nothing proposition here.
We can't.
No, we have to be inclusive and respectful of the plurality of what that phrase connotes, and also that it means no disrespect to the efforts and the altruistic issues of the police. So I think at the end of the day, the fact remains is that our stark realities in terms of economic, housing, education, and also many other issues, criminal justice, is that in fact the Black Lives experience is far more pronounced in terms of the disparities than are the rest of us who haven't faced those same encounters, at least, or the scope or magnitude has not been as pronounced. So as you pointed out very aptly, I think that you can revel in celebrating that Black lives should be sort of noted with some sense of distinction here, because the same opportunities that have been accorded many others have not been their lot, quite frankly, in Madison.
We have a lot of Tony Robinsons in Madison. Yeah. You know, not hundreds, but we have a lot of Tony Robinsons in Madison. And I think that's something we've got to get our hands around. Law enforcement plays a role in that.
Oh, absolutely.
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 But so does everybody else.
Yes, and again, you know, is the Tony Robinson mantra is raised. Let's understand, though, Tony actually defied a lot of what we see currently in the statistical compilations. Tony had a place to stay. Tony has a high school graduate. Many of our people of color are not graduating at the same level. So I hesitate to sort of compartmentalize it and all index it to the Tony Robinson investigation. I think, but to your better point, You're right. We've known, we've seen it chronicled since the Race to Equities report, that report is stark in its contrast, and that isn't going away.
Equity of housing is one thing, education, but maybe access to health care, mental health care. It seems like there's a lot of issues that we will be able to include in this conversation when that final report comes out.
Oh, I do think so. And again, I don't think that the police will sleep on what our role or involvement is ongoing. We need to be ever so mindful as we look at the way we work and how we work and our style of policing. Is that somehow or another creating unintended consequences that we're not aware of?
Why don't we talk a little bit more about that
Sure.
when we come back right after this with Chief Mike Koval. I'm back with Police Chief Mike Koval. Even as we anticipate the results of the investigation and the district attorney's findings in this case, Chief, the questions raised about policing style and tactics, they all seem to have some validity to me. It's always a good idea to look at what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And some things that pop instantly to mind are how many officers respond, how long you wait, that kind. How has this prompted you to think about those issues?
Well, I think that in the sense that once we are again in the postscript of the verdict and we can start to have this dialogue without that specter hanging on us, I hope that we can have some great dialogue, because some people will say carte blanche, you have the authority, just write into policy effective noon tomorrow, no officer shall ever enter the threshold of another home unless they're accompanied with a backup. And while that is true as a matter of administrative initiative, do we necessarily want to compromise on that, what might mean in terms of public safety? By that I mean, so I hear someone who is being stabbed in the house, I'm there on the doorstep. Based on my training experience, I hear it's getting worse. Do I really want those officers to stand down as a matter of bureaucratic fiat in order to be consistent with policy? I'm thinking that in that instance, it might be better still to allow for those individual necessities to dictate that there's a need to take immediate action. Someone's in peril, and I want to have that officer be in a position to respond and render aid. So we have a lot of discussions. I've heard everything from 2-officer squad cars as a mandate. That's a thought that we can talk about, but I can tell you 50% of our calls are handled exclusively by 1 officer. Does that make fiscal sense, and does it cut down on our response times, where we now have 2 officers that can be coming from divergent paths to create a better response time? So there's a lot of issues. The devil's in the details.
Is this going to add anything to the conversation about cameras, wearing cameras?
Almost certainly, because I had thought that perhaps as we were moving on with the ad hoc committee by the Common Council, that there had been sort of a measured response on both sides of the topic in terms of privacy issues, understanding what victims and juveniles and others might have in mind. But the starkness of this case has certainly trumped, sort of for the time being, a lot of those discussions in terms of there's a sense of urgency now to those cameras. So it'll be interesting to see how the study will be framed, how community sentiments will be changed or altered as a result of the Tony Robinson matter.
Right. I just dawned on me, we haven't even mentioned the words young, gifted, and black yet, and I don't want to go through a whole show and
Sure.
just because they are an important voice.
Absolutely.
Do you have any contact with them? Is there any dialogue?
Well, attempts on our part before a march, before a rally, we'd like to be able to work with them, get a sense of what their route of travel is, what their numbers could be like. But for whatever reason, they have chosen not to pick up the phone or not to return our calls, and as is their prerogative, because as luck would have it, by far most of our interactions in the ground, on the streets, has been, we found that happy balance, that medium. It has been tense at times, but at the end of the day, there has not been occasion to have arrests or any other, sort of incendiary moments between
and
us.
they do tend to publicly announce what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, right? I mean, through social media or other ways.
It's just a question of how much you want them to actually engage with us. That would be our preference, because then we could staff it, we could do traffic units, we could facilitate that. But that is their prerogative, and they've exercised it.
Chief, is the Robinson family still involved in the conversation here?
Well, I hope so, because I think at the end of the day, they are phenomenal voices in setting the tone. Owing to them, I believe that we had the capacity to keep Madison calmer than what we've seen played out elsewhere, because of the Robinsons' initiative in setting the table and saying people could obviously be dissentful, be angry, resentful, and continue to press for change, necessary change. They continually defaulted to, but do it responsibly and without hurting others. And I think we all took a cue from a family in that sense, and that created a healthier environment.
I got to ask you, Mike, just in case people notice it, I notice a black and blue ribbon around your badge. What is that?
Yes, of course, all of law enforcement in Wisconsin is mourning the death of the state trooper who was killed, Trevor Casper, and he will be memorialized on Sunday at his alma mater, Kiel High School. So until he's formally laid to rest in private services on Monday, we will be sending a healthy contingent from our Honor Guard and from other off-duty officers to mourn his loss and to celebrate his legacy.
Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank
and
you.
As when the result comes out, maybe we'll take the opportunity again to gather the community to respond to this.
And I hope it is peaceful.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chief.
Neil.
We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Chief Koval and to you for joining us. We'll see you next Sunday on For the Record.